Please don't take my child away." The words cracked like dry wood in the bitter air, spilling from the lips of a poor widow whose body looked as though it had been broken and remade 100 times by hardship. Her name was Eliza, and the boy clutching her hand, small, wide-eyed and trembling, was her son, Jacob. Dust rose around them as the wagon of the wealthy landowner stood firm in the yard, men with cold eyes waiting for orders. They had come for payment, and when payment could not be given, they had come for the only thing of value left, the child. Eliza's husband had died 2 winters ago, a sickness that spread through the town like wildfire, and with him went the little security they had. She worked the land as best she could, but without a man's strength, the ranch had crumbled beneath her hands. Debts piled, and when she could not keep up, the landowner, Mr. Callahan, demanded the boy as collateral, to raise him as a laborer until the debt was repaid. Jacob pressed into his mother's side, tears wetting the threadbare dress she wore, while Eliza dropped to her knees in the dirt, clutching her son's shoulders as if her body alone could shield him from the cruelty of the world. Her voice shook, her lips bled from biting them, her nails dug into her palms, but she begged nonetheless. "He's all I have. He's all that keeps me breathing. Please don't take my child away," Callahan sneered, spitting tobacco into the soil, his boots polished while everything around him reeked of decay. "Debts don't pay themselves, woman. You think your sob story buys bread? The boy works it off, or you lose the land completely. That's the law of the land." And perhaps it was. Men of wealth ruled with iron in those times, their words stronger than any court. The men moved to seize Jacob, who cried out in panic, his little fingers clawing into his mother's dress. Eliza screamed, the sound echoing across the barren fields like the cry of a wounded animal. But just as the men reached out, the ground seemed to tremble beneath the silence that followed. Silence deeper than any noise. All heads turned toward the figure standing at the edge of the yard. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dust-covered boots and a hat that cast a shadow across his eyes. His coat was worn, his shirt simple, but there was a strength about him, quiet and unshakable. He didn't shout, didn't draw his gun, didn't even move fast. He just stood there, watching with the kind of calm that unsettled men who thought they owned the world. The silent rancher, as the townsfolk often called him, because words rarely left his lips, and when they did, they mattered. His name was Matthew Kane. He stepped forward, each stride steady, controlled, deliberate, as though the earth itself bent to make way for him. The men paused, glancing toward their master, unsure. Callahan stiffened. "This ain't your business, Kane," he spat. "Move along. The woman owes and the boy pays." But Matthew kept walking, his boots crunching on gravel, his jaw locked, his gaze unwavering. He stopped only when he stood between Eliza and the men, a living wall of muscle and silence. Eliza's sobs stilled into quiet whimpers, Jacob burying his face in her side, sensing something shift in the air. The rancher didn't speak at first, just looked at the boy, then at the mother, then finally at Callahan. And when his voice came, it was deep, gravelly, like thunder rolling over the plains. "The boy stays." Callahan's face twisted with outrage. "You got no say here, Kane. This is debt. This is law." Matthew's eyes narrowed and his voice rumbled again. "Then I'll pay." Silence stretched over the yard. The men exchanged glances, confusion lacing their expressions. Pay? The rancher lived alone, worked his land in quiet, never indebted to anyone, never owing nor borrowing. He had no family, no alliances, just cattle and the strength of his back. Callahan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You can't cover what she owes. It's more than land. It's months of arrears. More than you've got." Matthew reached into his coat, pulled out a pouch heavy with coin. It clinked when he dropped it to the ground at Callahan's boots. The sound sharp against the silence. "That's the start. The rest you'll have by season's end." Callahan's brows shot up, suspicion twisting in his mind. Why? Why would you put yourself in her mess? And that was the question everyone in that yard wondered. Why would the silent rancher, a man who lived apart, care for a widow and her boy? Matthew didn't answer directly. His gaze dropped to Jacob, then to Eliza, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Perhaps he saw in the boy a reflection of himself, long ago when he too had been small and helpless and left to the cruelty of the world. Perhaps he saw in Eliza's desperate pleas the echo of a voice he once wished someone had answered for him. Whatever it was, his jaw tightened, and he spoke only 4 words. "The boy stays here." Callahan cursed under his breath, furious but calculating. He could push, but he knew Kane's reputation. The man wasn't just strong, he was relentless and he never bluffed. To cross him was to invite a storm you couldn't ride out. Callahan snapped his fingers at his men. Fine, but if the rest ain't paid, I'll take double. He spat again, turned on his heel and climbed into the wagon. The men followed, muttering, glancing back at the widow, the boy, and the lone rancher who stood like a sentinel in the dust. The wheels creaked, the wagon rolled, and soon they were gone, leaving only the silence of wind and the pounding heartbeats of the three left behind. Eliza collapsed onto her knees fully then, her hands trembling as she clutched Jacob to her chest, sobbing into his hair. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice raw. Matthew removed his hat, holding it at his side, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though he bore the weight of something heavier than just coin. He spoke, softly, barely above a murmur, but it carried with the strength of certainty. Keep him safe. That's thanks enough. And with that he turned to walk away. But Jacob, still clinging to his mother, looked up through tear-blurred eyes and called out, Mister, why did you help us? Matthew paused, his back to them, his shoulders squared like a man carved from stone. For a long moment, he didn't answer, didn't move, the silence stretching so long that Jacob thought he never would. Then finally Kane tilted his head just enough that his voice carried back. Because no child should beg for their mama. And then he walked on, leaving behind a widow whose heart, though still bruised, now carried the flicker of hope, and a boy who had just found his first real hero. The story of that moment would ripple through the town, whispered in saloons and over fences, that the silent rancher had stepped forward when no one else would. And for Eliza and Jacob, life would never be the same again. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if you felt the weight of a mother's cry and the strength of a man who chose to stand when it mattered most, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. More stories of courage, sacrifice, and second chances await you here, and your support means these powerful tales keep coming. So hit the subscribe button now, join our family, and never miss another story that just might change how you see the world. The days after that night passed like a slow sunrise, carrying with them a weight of uncertainty mixed with the faint stirrings of hope. Eliza, still shaken from almost losing her son, found herself waking each morning with gratitude and disbelief that Jacob was still there in her arms. Yet along with relief came fear of the debt that hung over her like a hawk, circling above, fear of Callahan's men returning with harder hearts, and fear of leaning too heavily on the silent rancher who had stepped forward when no one else dared. She worked tirelessly on her land, her hands blistering, her back aching, pushing herself beyond what her body should bear, because she could not allow herself to be a burden. But the truth was, the soil was thin, the tools old, and one woman's strength against a farm's demand was like whispering against the roar of a storm. Jacob did what he could, carrying water, feeding chickens, chasing straying goats back into their pen, but he was still a boy, his spirit bright though his frame was small. Many nights Eliza cried quietly when he slept, wondering how long they could endure. It was on one of those mornings, just as the sun crept up and painted the horizon with gold, that Matthew Kane appeared again. He came on horseback, his stallion dark and sleek, his form upright and steady. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself, just dismounted and began fixing the sagging fence as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Eliza rushed out, confusion and unease in her face. You don't need to, she began, but he cut her off with a look, not sharp, not unkind, but final. He didn't say much, but his hands spoke in nails hammered straight and posts driven deep into the ground. Jacob, wide-eyed, watched with awe as the rancher worked, fascinated by the strength in every swing of the hammer. Mama, Jacob whispered, tugging at her sleeve. He's like a giant, Eliza couldn't help but smile, faintly through her worry. He's a good man, she whispered back, though her voice carried uncertainty. Why was he here? Why was he helping? She knew nothing of him except that he lived alone, far on the edge of town with no kin and no company, only cattle and silence. Yet he had paid her debt, at least in part, and now he was here fixing her fence. When the work was done, Matthew stood, dusting off his hands, and gave a single nod toward the field. Your plow's broken, he said simply. Eliza blinked. It was true, the plow had been cracked for months, tied together with rope and prayer. I don't have, she stammered. But he had already turned to his horse, pulling down a sturdy plow from the back, one he had brought with him. "Use this," he said. Her lips parted to protest again, but his steady gaze silenced her. He wasn't asking. He was giving. Jacob ran forward, his face beaming. "Thank you, Mr. Kane." The rancher's mouth twitched, the barest shadow of a smile as he gave the boy a nod. From that day on, Matthew came often. He never lingered for words, never sat at their table uninvited, but always brought something they needed: a tool, a sack of seed, or his own hands to work the soil. He showed Jacob how to ride a horse, how to tie a rope, how to mend leather, his deep voice guiding the boy with patience that surprised even himself. And though Eliza kept her distance at first, wary of owing a man more than she could ever repay, she couldn't deny the changes she saw. Jacob laughed more now. He stood taller. He spoke of dreams, of wanting to be strong like Cain, of wanting to help his mother. For the first time in a long while, hope lived in their home, but not everyone looked kindly on this unexpected bond. Callahan, bitter and suspicious, sent men to watch, to whisper in the saloon that Eliza was trading favors for Cain's protection, that she was a widow too desperate, too weak, and Cain a fool blinded by her tears. The gossip grew, poisonous and sharp, winding its way into the ears of townsfolk who thrived on judgment. One evening, as Eliza returned from the market, head bowed against the stairs, she heard the whispers, women clucking their tongues, men snickering as she passed. Her face burned with shame, though she had done nothing but try to keep her son alive. That night, when Cain brought over a wagon of firewood, she confronted him, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't come here so often." "People are talking." Matthew stood still, his hat in his hand, his eyes steady on her. "Let them talk." She shook her head, tears brimming. "You don't